Thank you, everybody, for coming. We are here today to launch the latest issue of Modern Poetry in Translation, which is Rhythms of the Land, focus on the poetry of nature. These poems address ecology, climate change, mythologies that respect the earth, correspondences between outer territory and inner self, and the cultivation of a slow, nurturing relation with communities and other beings, in contrast to the acceleration and violence of the news cycle. And the issue has many wonderful poems by people from all over the world. Today we have with us two amazing translators, Ottilie Mulzet and Sara Elkamel. We are going to hear a few poems in their voices and then go to a conversation and then an audience discussion. I'd like to read their biographies first, if that's all right. So first, Ottilie Mulzet. In this issue, she translated a selection of Hungarian women poets, which will be published by Seagull Books this autumn. She is a very well-known Hungarian translator who has worked on, among others, Laszlo Krasznahorkai, the recent winner of the Nobel Prize. In 2019, she was awarded the National Book Award for Translated Literature for her translation of Krasznahorkai's novel Baron Wenckheim's Homecoming. And as I mentioned, she also works on many other Hungarian novelists and poets, including the women in this issue, who are Zsuzsa Rakowski, Gisela Hervé, Zsuzsa Benet, and Magda Szekely. Then we also have with us Sara Elkamel, who holds an MA in Arts Journalism from Columbia University and an MFA in Poetry from New York University. She is a Pushcart Prize winner and the author of the poetry chapbook Field of No Justice, published by Akashic Books and the African Poetry Book Fund. Her translations include Mona Karim's chapbook I Will Not Fold These Maps, published by the Poetry Translation Center, and Dalia Taha's Enter World, coming out with Grey Wolf Press this year. And we had the good fortune to publish a selection of Dalia Taha's poems in this issue. And just as a note of another congratulatory note, the poem that we posted on our website by Dalia Taha was the most liked and shared of all the poems we've ever put on the MPT page. So definitely there are readers for these translations. Right, so we can get started. Just another quick note, this is the 60-year anniversary of MPT, so this is a magazine that's been going for a while now and doing lots of good work in helping to share translations into English. So I think we had discussed we'd start with some readings by Ottilie and then continue with Sara, if that's all right.
Thank you very much.
Ideally, we can have in total about 10 minutes each person.
Okay, thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you very much for the invitation. It's really an honor. So I'd like to start with a couple of poems by Zsuzsa Rakowski, which are translated by myself. Zsuzsa Rakowski was born in 1950 in Sopron, Hungary. She already has a collection in English by George Sirtes, New Life, published by Oxford University Press in 1994. I strongly recommend you to seek it out. Her best-selling novel, Shadow of the Snake, has been translated into German, Italian, Bulgarian, and Dutch. She has received many prizes, including the Attila Yoshev Prize in 1988 and the Libri Literature Prize in 2016. She has been a member of the Széchenyi Academy of Literature and Arts ever since 2009. So, Zsuzsa Rakowski, Face, Rembrandt, Portrait of Archie Kleder. I know that face from somewhere. Excuse me. 100 years ago, or this afternoon, I saw her picking apples at the market in sparse autumn light, cat underfoot, The two vertical pleats engraved above her nose, chiseled by a whole life's worry and cares behind her startled old eyes, is all of that life's light and shadow, cooking, wash days, ill-intentioned folk, meager harvests, infants with running bowels, tranquil Sundays spent with a tapestry needle, kittens in buckets of water drowned, the May altar decorations for the Blessed Mother, winds blowing, hail falling, heat, light, and frost, children departing for distant shores, the white capelet, the bonnet with its veil. This is a face that was never young. It cannot be tied to any place or time. When I was 2 years old, she held my hand. Time makes other faces resemble itself, and they too leave their handprints upon time. There are those who polish their existence only once, poets, popes, soldiers, and kings, held up as an emblem for some city or land, while they themselves, as statues, keep existing, their footprints remaining in the dust of that age. But she comes to us in somewhat different guise, not clinging to one land or century. She has no immortal self engraved in stone, falling apart then reassembled, a dark river's spume. This poem is entitled also by Zsuzsa Rakowski. It's entitled Journey Back in Time. There's a little epitaph. The American hypnotherapist Bruce Goldberg and his followers employ hypnosis to lead their patients back to their earlier lives, thus discovering the causes of their current problems. As a copper ring, I was tossed into the fire. When a stray cat, the mop bucket was my fate. A king, I was remanded to the executioner. I was a belt buckle, earth buried for 5 millennia. With crooked arms, goitrous neck, I crouched in clouds of flies next to a mud-stained river. I baked flatbread on stone indifferently, while hundreds of dead floated by on sun-scorched waters. I was an old woman too, dawdling all day in my nightshirt, telling my grievances to the wall. When I went out to get matches from the shop, robbers stole half my peppers and my yellowed slip. I drowned in the tub of a burning house. I went to battle, left behind my leg. I wilted in my despotic mother's shadow. In a peasant courtyard's dust, I was devoured by pigs. I penetrated into ever thicker darkness, falling to the very edge of time. As if plunging from a train at night, I saw nothing, only diffused figures looming, but even there I searched for some originating goal, cause, or crime. But in the end, there was nothing, just some kind of wall. And beyond that, only void, blue emptiness with its slowly dying stars. So the next poet is Gisela Hervé. She is a Transylvanian poet, and these poems are translated by Erika Mihajca, who is an academic, a Joyce specialist. In fact, she teaches at the university in Cluj, Nepoța Cluj, and she is sometimes termed the Ingeborg Bachmann of Transylvania. She grew up in an exceptionally poor family. She had a very, very difficult childhood. She started writing early. She was mostly neglected by criticism during her life, but she began publishing in the 1960s. I should mention she was born in 1934. She was awarded the prize for Hungarian art posthumously in 1993. Unfortunately, um, she had one son. He passed away in the Bucharest earthquake of 1977, and she subsequently, 5 years later, she took her own life. So again, these poems are translated by Erika Mihajca, who is a very important contributor to my edited anthology, and I'm very grateful for her translations. She actually introduced me in more depth to the work of Gisela Hervé, so I'm very grateful for that too. A beginner at death among you, with whole pierced forehead, bared hands, I stepped backward among you, my coat in the wind turned inside out. balancing with umbrella on time's tautened rope, bowing over the fallen with orphan hope. Bread and knife they seized, departing on luxury trains. We stay behind with our bare bones, eternal earth dwellers. The petrified mother holds her dead son in her lap, carries him away across foreheads, puts him down by the shores of mouths, delivers death anew. Loden coat on the hook of Eastern Europe. We put it on in turn in the common rain. Waste falls from our mouth, rusty hair from rusty nails from our hair, plaster from our faces. Above our heads, an interchangeable Loden coat in the sky, maps of interchangeable destinies, interchangeable depths, brass buttons of interchangeable faiths, bowels of interchangeable people, lipstick stains of interchangeable loves, interchangeable hooks, interchangeable Loden coats hanging in the wind. So the next poem will be by Juja Benet. She was born in, I'm sorry, just scrolling to 1930. She passed away in 2006. I didn't know her personally. I was able to meet some people who knew her, and she worked as a physician actually all her life. She retired at the age of 70, but literature was just as much of a career for her. And apparently, she was really an outstanding physician and truly cared about her patients. Somebody who was a very good friend of hers told me. She received a PhD in literary studies in 1993. She taught poetry at several universities, and she published, in the end, 9 volumes of poetry, several novels. She was also a highly regarded literary historian. I've read a lot of her literary criticism, and it's wonderful. She received many distinguished prizes, including the Ottilie Prize in 1990. So this is translated by myself. The guest, sleeping on my pillow, never to be disturbed, like a cat, needing my legs every night, already a tangible body, graspable. I embrace this body in despair like a lover who no longer desires, compelled precisely by lack of desire, by solitude, to cling to the other. I don't know what I fear more, disappearance or this presence alongside me till the end of time. Before I knew him, I walked through woods, through fields. I glided like the wind. I escaped like Kore in her disguise. And the next poem is by Magda Seke. Magda Seke was similarly, I think she was born in 1930 or 1936. She passed away also 2007, a year after Juja Benet. She was born in an assimilated Jewish family, and many of her relatives died during World War II, during the fascist prosecution of the Jews in World War II in Hungary. She saw her mother being dragged away when she was 8 by Hungarian gendarmes. She survived the Holocaust being hidden in a monastery, in fact. Then she was hidden by a Swabian family until the end of the war. Her first volume was published in 1962. She published 9 volumes of poetry. She received many prizes, but her work is not extensive, or she published not so many volumes. And at the end, she lived a very secluded life, mainly involved in her own writing. Magda Seke, The Damned. They leaned over the borders of their being as far as the mountain peak where I lived. I saw their pine tree bodies, and in certain rapture, I touched the living hems of their capacious robes, o'ertwined. As they went by, the coarse feathers of their large wings touched my forehead. Then I plunged down, the walls of the sky rumbling all around me. I fell upon the nimble spokes of the air cleaving apart. I still saw their luminous corners flaring up on the mountain ridge. Then, as the plunging slowed, I circled round the lower waters. The current carries my blackening body like blind ash. The oily mineral water raises me in its thickly woven basket. And while the measure of the barren night sea blares in its rhythm unceasingly and the heights drifting away, I still hear the rustle of their wings. Thank you.
Thank you, Ottilie, for those beautiful poems in your voice. We can continue with Sara now.
Hi, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be here today. Thank you, Jessica, for inviting me, and it's such a pleasure to be reading with Ottilie. It's just like uh, listening to your selections and the voices of these poets. I feel very enchanted and mesmerized. Such a beautiful reading. Thank you. Okay, so I've been working with Dalia Taha for almost a year now. Dalia is a Palestinian poet, playwright, and educator. She has an MFA in playwriting from Brown University. And she's published a few Arabic poetry books, including the biography of the people of the city of Ar, published in 2021, and Enter World, which was just published this year in Arabic. And she's actually doing book launches for that book this month. And so I think it's rare that the translation is happening concurrently with the actual production of the book in its original language. And I guess it's the reflection of that the book Enter World responds directly to the war in Gaza, which started 2 years ago and is hopefully coming to an end. So yes, these translations I'm about to read are from Dalia's most recent poetry collection, but she's had plays published and staged, including at the Royal Court Theatre in London and the Flemish Royal Institute in Brussels. And my translation of Enter World is forthcoming from Grey Wolf Press in 2026. So I'll start with the poems published in Modern Poetry and Translation first, and then I'll read a few more just from the collection. Enter Shadows of Trees. At Birzeit University, near the Faculty of Arts, is a sidewalk painted white, surrounded by 4 trees. Their shadows interlace over its surface in the fall and sparkle. I walk after class across light and darkness. I cannot begin to describe the scene. Yellow, silver, green, and black. Believe me when I say all of it sparkles. If you visit our school looking for truth or questions, for the Faculty of Sciences or Philosophy, walk past the trees and try to enter the world once more through the most desolate road. Watch how, each day, the wind erases another, one of the trees' answers. Enter Palestinian love. We Palestinians love what we love a little more than we should. Look how we love our universities, our plums, our country's crisp air, our za'atar, our poets, our villages blown to pieces. We are always prepared to love a little more than we should, always prepared to die a little more than we should. Enter hills. You can't see it, but I stared too long at the hills my eyes have bruised. It's on the inside, beneath the skin, in the spot closest to what they call the soul. The hills are otherworldly and distant, particularly those between Jericho and Amman. From the taxi, they appear as a procession of souls, or like snipers contemplating the desert road. Everything is in its place, like a mathematical equation. the living on one side and the dead on the other. But from somewhere on those hills, I imagine the dead waving to us, trying to climb down to the highway where the cars glimmer before they vanish into the wind. In the right lane, one truck after another hauls stones under a setting sun, where the wind is the one true driver, dragging us behind it, our necks bent backward. I can understand now that everything began here, on this arid, lightless land. Everything that came next was coincidence. Trees, rivers, insects, the shapes of clouds and weeds, and suspended bridges. And it is here too that everything will end, leaving no trace of this world, but the mystery of how it began. I'm obsessed with the hills. I can't stop staring at them, like I'm trying to remember where we met before, like their name is on the tip of my tongue. I try to pull it out from a cavernous gorge within me. From my childhood, I believed that if I stared at anything long enough, it would start to move. This, of course, has never happened. But the hills do in fact look like they're about to start walking towards me. Just look at the droplets of light shimmering above them, like 100 eyes opening at the same instant. My bags are in the trunk, and here in the hot air of the Jordan Valley, I feel as though what my hands folded just moments ago were not my clothes, but crumpled souls, and that what my eyes now watch passing outside the window are not the hills, but the ruins of the roads we crossed before we arrived in this world, naked, bathed in bruises and blood, and finally able to scream. Enter city's inhabitants. All my poems are attempts to copy, on paper, the poems before me, the inhabitants of my city. By day, I see them, and by night, I write about them. In daylight, I observe how eyes compete with the dark circles beneath them for a larger share of each face, just as poem and white space wrestle to squeeze into one page. And at night, I wonder what each eye, shaped like a camera lens, had managed to record. What is it that appears in their dreams that leaves them so distracted, so lost in thought come morning? What circles and circles their minds behind faces that seem like sheets of paper fresh off the printer? I do not know them. I know nothing but their eyes, slanted and sad, and their faces as vacant as tropical islands, slabs of sand carved by shadows, and their dark circles, which transform together with the trees into bestial shapes in the evening. And I know that under the canopy of trees, they drift through the city streets like the covers of used books, encircled by hills that appear to be staring back at them, the settlements on their peaks. And they traverse the sentences inscribed on the walls of their city like they themselves were sentences or question marks. And sometimes they become these sentences, and they die standing upright like trees. I do not know you, but I know that spending a lifetime watching settlements and surveillance cameras sprawling over the faces of your mountains has done something to your face. Enter vacated homes. A handful of houses spilling weeds and grass is all that remains of 500 villages erased from existence. In the old photographs snatched from their owners, you find traces of past lives. A man and a donkey, a woman walking down the street with a straw basket on her head, a crowd gathered in the courtyard of a mosque. How distant they look in black and white. How strange that this house, now inhabited unreservedly by trees, belonged once to men, their dreams, and their water pots. There they lived and made love. Blood stained the tiles where their children were born. There they did everything humans do. They strained to decipher the whispers escaping the next room, and picked up the ceramic shards shattered on the floor with extreme caution to protect their fingers from scrapes. And when sleep began to sway them, they stayed up, their eyes fixed on the ceiling, listening to the trees and the barking dogs, waiting for the sun to rise. Their faces filled these houses with cruelty and pain and rage, their features convulsed in moments of rapture. Had they ever imagined that the trees they watered with love would take over their favorite rooms? That herbs and wildflowers would become their grandchildren, that grass would fill the house they fled with its green face. Enter olive trees. Evergreen through the descent of snow or dust, and at the tail end of summer. Only on account of night does it change into silver, only for love. There are 13 million olive trees in Palestine, 13 million love stories stretched across the hills, 13 million thorny stories. It is as if every Palestinian in the world can claim an olive tree, each extending its roots into the earth and its neck before the settlement. If you want to see mankind's cruelest face for yourself, come to our land. If you want to witness the darkest fraction of night, visit the olive trees and gaze between their arms. It will feel like spying on night in its bedroom. The tree does not fear night's bleak soul, just as night does not fear the barred branches. Right there, every Palestinian owns their share of oil and darkness, their share of gold and red. With the oil harvest, our scraped fingers and arms bleed. The settlers hunt us on the hills, and the sinless valleys turn into battlefields, into mills. From one tap, a golden syrup leaks out, and from its sister, blood. We return with oil tins and with shrouds, and when the bitterness burns our throats, we have tasted the flavor of the homeland. Okay, thank you all so much for listening. I will end with this poem called Enter Short Poem. I want my poems to be as short as possible. I want to vanquish white space with 2 words, to vanquish death with a wooden sword. I want my poems to be the shade a cypress tree casts at noon, a child holding a giant's head, a palm-sized mirror, taken up almost entirely by a face tears have veiled. I want my poem to be a tunnel that can only accommodate one body, or an infant on its mother's chest, gnawing on the nipples, like a drop of milk on the nipple, a gold earring on an unpaved road. My poem will not set the reader free, just like mass graves will set no one free. I want my poem to behave like night, routinely moving past daytime and refusing to shake its hand. I want my poem to be like the question of migrating or staying home. Even when you settle it, you live out your life in its jaws. Like a coffee stain on a dress shirt in a meeting room, as viscous as love's fingers. Like the truth, it will not lift morale. Thank you.
Thank you, Sara, for those very powerful poems. We can move on to the conversation now. I have many impressions after hearing all of these poems, but maybe we can start talking about the books that you're both working on, because I understand that both of these selections come from books that are coming out this autumn or next year, very soon. Under a Pannonian Sky in the case of the Hungarian selection, and Enter World in the case of the Palestinian poetry. Would you like to talk about your process of putting the book together, and in the case of the living authors, working with the author?
Oh, thank you very much. Yes, this anthology has been a very long time in the making. I would say almost 7 or 8 years ago, I began thinking about it. and I made it a practice to start reading women's poetry in Hungarian much more widely and broadly and in depth. And I was really inspired. Once I should talk a little bit or just mention the Hungarian Translators House in Balatonfüred in Hungary, which is a translator's residence where anyone who's translating from Hungarian literature can go and work. And normally you receive a small stipend. It's a beautiful 19th century villa, about 10 minutes walk from the shores of Lake Balaton. So it's really quite an idyllic location. It was opened in 1998. The house itself used to be a very famous literary salon. The owner died, and he bequeathed the house with for nonprofit uses with the idea that it should be used only for literary purposes. Um, so I've been going there since 2004. I've probably been really dozens, many, many times, many years. I've gone more than once a year. It was actually there that I came across this book. If you can all, I hope you can see it. It's an anthology of Hungarian women's poetry, Magyar Költőnök Antológiája. What's incredible is that as far as I know, it's the only one that's been published to date, which just seems crazy, but it's just the way it is. It was published in 97, and it was just sitting on the shelf in one room when I was working, I think, on the poetry of Szilárd Borbély, if I'm not mistaken. And it literally has it's of course it only goes up to 1997 because that's when it was published, but it literally focuses or shows the work of 100, I think up to 100 women poets. The first one died in 1552, so it shows you how extensive it is. And not only was I drawn to the idea of this anthology, but I have to say I first saw this anthology really like years ago, and it planted the germ of an idea in my mind to produce a similar anthology in English. And of course, I didn't feel that I should take on an anthology spanning many centuries as this did, or maybe even more than one century. My anthology spans I think the oldest poet in my anthology, I was born 100 years ago, or about 100 years ago, 1922. And the youngest poet is Anati Sabo, who was born in 1972. So that's a span of about 50 years. So for me, it was really a process of, I have to say, it was very difficult, and I often felt very intimidated and afraid that I was making the wrong decision of trying to decide what kind of anthology it would be and what sort of thematic shape. I finally decided that the thematic shape should be the poets that I felt were most strongly influenced by a movement that came about in Hungary after World War II. It's called Újhold, New Moon. And it's not so much a movement as it was a magazine that was published right after starting 1946, so right after World War II, which, as you know, was just absolutely devastating in Hungary on many levels. And it was immediately shut down by the incipient communist government. It was denounced as bourgeois and individualist. And so all the writers who were writing for it were really the most important ones. They immediately kind of went underground and were writing for the desk door, were supporting themselves by translation or writing children's books and so on. But this generation for me, I think in there, and I think you could see it even in the small selection of these women poets that um, they a determination to confront historical truth, not from a specifically directly political stance, but more from a kind of almost a spiritual or psychic stance. A lot of these women were writing during the communist times, where, of course, I mean, things in Hungary were not as terrible as they were in Czechoslovakia, for example, but it still was not really a free society. And I particularly, again, I just really wanted to lift up the women writing in this tradition, because while many of these women, they're known in Hungary, they're celebrated, but it has to be said they're not at all canonized to the same degree, whereas the men writing in this movement are just absolutely canonized by the literary establishment like 10 million times over. And somehow these women have not really been granted the same level of recognition. Well, of course, I can't really have any influence on like what the Hungarian literary establishment is doing, but I do have influence over what I can translate and put into English, at least. And a lot of them, I mean, some of them would, Agnieszka Mesnod, she's been widely translated by George Sirtes, for example. So she's well represented. But some of the other ones really have just not been published very much in English. So it was also just really trying to fill a gap, I guess, as well, that I felt existed in the translated canon in English.
Um, I can talk about my collaboration with Dalia, which is like obviously like a very more limited scale than Ottilie's endeavor to like create an anthology and create kind of a living record of Hungarian poetry, which is a project I really, really admire and I think is so essential to like find where the gaps are and kind of try to work to fill them. I'm really honored to be in conversation with you. Um, and so yeah, I first encountered Dalia's work in an issue of an online journal called Magazine. It's kind of like a sporadically published journal conceived by of and edited by Miren Arsanios, who is a New York-based writer. And so the issue was published in 2018 that had Dalia's poems in it, and it was called Dictatorship. It kind of was a response to a call by the co-editors, which included Miran Arsanios and also Imen Mersel, who's an Egyptian poet that I absolutely adore. So the call was to an invitation to engage with the relationships between writing, dictation, and dictatorship. Um, and and then there were six untitled poems by Dalia in the issue in Arabic, so they weren't published in translation. In them, like obviously the presence of war and violence were undisputed and very obvious, but also there was something in there that really gripped me. And I think just like these rich images, I remember like the speaker's grandmother's home or grandparents' home was really present in the poems. Was so much beautiful texture there, um, and uh, and I just found myself immediately responding to these poems and kind of banking the work and thinking, oh, one day if I were to translate, at that time I wasn't translating yet, then I would love to work with her. And I remember adding her on Facebook then, but then like never actually messaged her. And then years later, so last year, Grey Wolf had this call for poetry in translation so they wanted translators to send in samples of projects that they were working on, and I didn't have a sample of Dalia's work, but I reached out to her and I said, "Oh, you don't know me, but I'm a writer and I love your work, and I also translate. Would you be open to submitting to this?" And she said no. She was like, I don't know you. So I at least like need to see a sample, need to see your work first. And I was like, okay, fair enough. Give me 2 days. And I sent her a sample and like I was so pleased that she liked the translations and she said, okay, why not? Let's submit a sample to Grey Wolf. So we worked, and it kind of, that's the way it started, and it's still the way it is, where we work very closely together. I create drafts of the translations, I revise my drafts, and then I share them with her in a form that's like not embarrassing. And then we work on a Google Doc, and I have questions, sometimes queries about like, you know, how when sometimes the work travels across languages, it like the syntax maybe obscures the meaning, the new syntax, and then you kind of like lose track of the intended meaning, and find yourself with new meanings. And then I want to make sure that that's okay, or that I'm not too far from her intentions. So anyway, we have this ongoing Google Doc with questions and comments and ideas. And it's really a collaboration between us. It's not, yeah, I think we both really respect each other's work and minds, and so there's this space for us to have productive conversations, and also like kind of stick to what we want, if we want to retain something or change something. But anyway, so our proposal to Grey Wolf was accepted, and then we were like, okay, let's do more of the manuscript. And so it's mostly like I have the freedom to select which poems I want to translate and work on, and then um, and then we collaborate on the final forms of the translated poems. But there are a few like so Dalia is always her desire is to create in translation versions that are not too far from the Arabic originals. And obviously sometimes I want to depart from the originals. It's challenging also because I'm a poet myself, and it's hard for me to take off my poet hat and put on my translator's hat, which is they're both like different impulses between yeah, like the level of control and the so anyway, we are I think we're friends now, and that's such a beautiful thing to have gained. What started as just, you know, an endeavor based in purely based on writing and translation became like a personal and really rich exchange. And I'm so grateful for that.
I just want to say, I think that just sounds so incredible and rich and just so productive. And it just absolutely came through in the translations, which were just absolutely stunning. Thank you.
Yeah, the both translations were so wonderful and lyrical and got to the essence, I think, of what the poets were trying to convey in their way. So yeah, congratulations to both. Just to let anybody watching know, we've opened the questions. So if anybody has a question, they can send it to the form there. But I'll ask maybe something overly large, but we've heard about the relation between the translator and the work, and I'm just very curious about the ways that these projects kind of fit into the larger field of Hungarian and or Arabic, Palestinian in particular literature. How do you see your work kind of going into that field, and what do you see as the field in general in terms of its maybe direction or the things people are interested in working on in those languages?
Yeah, I think that part of it for me is most certainly about trying to bring a correction to the reception of Hungarian literature in English because I think Eastern European literature and Hungarian translation is really sorry, in English translation is really quite a special case. For example, in the United States, in terms of prose, a lot of it really uh, formed during the Cold War. So a lot of it was really informed by the politics of the Cold War. And usually there was a whole sort of group of dissidents that were often supported and or feted. And I'm not saying that they didn't do important work because they often, obviously, they often really did. But they were, of course, they were all almost overwhelmingly male. Um, and for example, uh, this informed the reception or the formation of the translated literature canon from Eastern Europe. So, for example, in the United States, if you look at, for example, Philip Roth, Writers from Another Europe, that was such a seminal series that he was one of the first ones to publish Milan Kundera in English, Tadeusz Borowski, many, many writers, Bruno Schulz. But looking back, and obviously I would never deny the seminal importance of that series. At the same time, were there any women in that series? I really don't know. Actually, I think there were certainly women translators. And of course, at that time, the role of translators was, I would say, even more sort of um, underemphasized than even today. So I think that, there's a question of like, what's going on in the reception, the target language, the culture, the literary culture that the translation is going into. So even though, I do feel that in terms of English language reception, that there's been a huge shift, especially over the last 2 decades, of really trying to bring in more voices, which I just think is so important, actually. And it's just been so really gratifying to see. And of course, you have as well the literary culture of the source language is also very important. And it has to be said in terms of Hungary that it's still really, I mean, I think that too is changing possibly. I see publishers publishing more women, more younger women writers are being featured, but it's still very oriented, very heavily oriented male, I would say, in terms of, as I said before, who is canonized, who is getting all the prizes. Even though the women I've translated here, some of them they did receive prizes, but they just were never canonized in the same way. And they somehow don't sit in that pantheon. That literature in Hungary is just, it tends to be really incredibly important. It always has been very important. It's something that people really take to heart. And even, I mean, current government campaign against what they call, left-wing literature in a strange and their desire to kind of like create their own canon, which would be more nationalistic and more, I don't know, like showing Hungarians in a positive light. I don't know, and enough with this depression and whatever the muddy plains of Hungary, whatever, and this sort of Shatantango, sort of this Krasnohorkai type, depiction. But even that really betrays, their desire to reshape this canon in this sort of really, really patriarchal, sort of nationalistic way. Even that shows how seriously they take literature. That have just been since the last 15 years, they've just been trying and trying and trying, to kind of reshape this canon. And even though, on paper they have, but in terms of like what the writers that people really consider to be important, they haven't. But yet at the same time, there's this sort of this faux canon that's been like pushed, being pushed constantly by the government. But at the same time, even within that core of readership who I think really are tuned into, the important writers, I think even there's more room to elevate women. So that was like a really big part of the reason why I did this. And while it seems incredible, I did have people in Hungary asking me, well, why just women? Won't that ghettoize them? Isn't this, I think women should just be published because they're good, not just because they're, some people like, I realized that I met with genuine like lack of understanding. So it was very hard for me to, it was a little hard for me to kind of remain calm. But I tried to explain it as best I could. that the whole, the values that said that this writer was good and this writer was not good, really since the beginning of Hungarian literature was, very much in favor of men. So yeah, so that I mean, I would say in that way, it is an intervention on my part. But again, part of it is just really, I think that these women are just such incredible poets. I just really want to bring their poetry to a different audience. And that I have to say, I've been reading them for so many years now, for like decades. And for me, they're spiritually very important because so many of them, they just went through such tough times. So you could see that. Like the earliest one was born in 1922, so she was like in college. World War II was going on. That she's not featured in the selection. For example, Agnes Nebeshnad, she like was forging documents in a basement during World War II. I mean, this is like their experiences were just, like extreme. Just extreme. A lot of them really went through a lot. And even the ones who were born in the 70s who experienced, who came of age, let's say in 1989 during the Hungarians call it regime change, that too has been like really a roller coaster ride. In the 90s, there was just really chaotic privatization, often very corrupt, a really unequal distribution of resources, reallocation of state resources, which is absolutely non-transparent. And it just led to a lot of discontent and sort of, we end up where we are now with a very, people call it a hybrid regime. I think it's not an unfair characterization. With newer, new problems and new, like really serious problems. And that's, even though they're not included in this selection, but I think that's reflected in the younger poets and I think that also, for example, in Zsuzsa Rakowski's work, for example, she also, she doesn't come at it directly, but I think that in her poem, This Portrait, she really does, she comes at this question, this gender question in a really sort of indirect way, talking about, those who polish their existence only once, and these are the great men, especially for a small Eastern European country. These are always like the ones who are held up as the emblems of the nation, the great revolutionary heroes, the great revolutionary poets. How often is that a woman even? They're popes, they're poets, popes, soldiers, and kings. And yet this woman is like something like an every woman, and yet with no specific identity, but she somehow fades in and out of history. She's almost like omniscient in a way. So I think she's positing like a different kind of subjectivity in the world with this poem. So again, I wanted to really, they come at these historical events from a completely different point of view, and I just think it's so important, to bring that into focus.
Thank you.
Um, I think for me, just briefly, it's Dalia's poetry. So Ghassan Kanafani wrote in Palestinian literature of resistance under occupation, of like Palestinian literature post the Nakba or 1948, is that Palestinian poetry embodies this insistence on clinging to the land. And in Dalia's work, I feel like the land becomes not only physical but metaphysical. So, like from one of the poems I read, Enter Olive Trees, if you want to witness the darkest fraction of night, visit the olive trees and gaze between their arms. So I think there is this way that she shows how the land and the people bleed into one another in poems of kind of porous terrain, where like words rustle in the wind. And so there is like a way that she extends the lineage of Palestinian poetry. So the famous poets like Mahmoud Darwish and Samih Al-Qasim and Taha Muhammad Ali, who have been like widely celebrated and translated. This is Dalia's voice is one that's contemporary and kind of carries forward a poetics of the surreal, of disruption and interiority, and of course, like she is a woman, and like I'm always interested in the poetics of what it means to be a woman in the world, and so there are also like incredible and widely translated or writing in English Palestinian contemporary poets like Musab Abu Toha and Muhammad al-Kurd. And she shares with them this refusal to choose between witness and invention. Like, so there's political poetry, but it's also, poetic and aesthetically inventive. But I also just love working with women in terms of like the translator author relationship, but also like I believe that it's a voice that's worth listening to just because it's there and it's different, and it just deserves attention. So yeah.
Thank you, Sarah. So we're in the last 5 minutes here. Maybe we can take one question from the audience. Somebody said, congratulations on your Nobel Prize, Ottilie. For both of you, I'm wondering how much of a sense of ownership you feel when the writers you translate win prizes or have other kinds of very public success.
Oh, well, thank you for the congratulations on my Nobel Prize. I'll take it. I'll take it. I'm not going to turn it down. But I would say that, of course, I do feel like that I do have some role. I think in terms of, I mean, of course, there are other prizes that really acknowledge the translator more. And a list started circulating actually of all of Krasnohorkai's translators. And it's just, I mean, obviously, some people translated many books, some people translated an article, but it's a really long list, maybe with like 60 people or something. And I think it would really be wonderful if the Nobel Prize would find a way to somehow, I know they have a bibliography on their website, to somehow acknowledge, all of the translators, actually. I mean, probably for their committee, probably I would imagine Swedish, German, and English are important. But I have to say, in some ways, even German, I think is more important than English, actually, in terms of influencing their decision. So it's not really the same as when there's a prize and sort of like uh, translator gets half or whatever, translator and writer are acknowledged together. I have to say, I think those kinds are like very nice. But I'm very proud of Laszlo, and I just think it's a really well-deserved recognition for him, actually, because I think his work just spans so much and really speaks to today in a way that's really, really timeless, actually. So I'm generally just very, very happy for him. Thank you.
And maybe Sarah, I know that Dalia's work is getting more attention now with, well, the political situation, but also your translations. So I don't know if you have ideas about that as well.
Um, I think it's tricky. Like I still find it weird to say my book about like Interworld, for example, forthcoming from Grey Wolf, and then I say our book, and then I'm not sure if so I don't know yet. We'll see. TBD on like just I think the way that translation complex idea of ownership is really interesting, and I'm curious to see how that develops in my head and in my own relationship to my translated work.
Thank you. So I think we have to be wrapping up pretty soon now, but there were a few more questions. I'll just read them so you can keep thinking. There was one about how we can, order the books. So I think the web editor will be sending around a link to everybody who attended so they can know how to get hold of the books. Then somebody else asked if it's essential for a translator of poetry to be a writer of poems themselves, and how far from the original one can ethically stray with the metaphor or image in the source language. A difficult question of translation. And then finally, somebody also, another appreciation rather than a question, said thank you for sharing so much of Dalia Taha's poetry about her home country, hearing the color of the sky and the earth, smelling the atmosphere, scented with vegetation, rich, not nostalgic, not angry, just alive, and for giving us an insight into the collaboration with the author, sharing the initial contact, and then building mutual respect. So, yeah, I think there's lots of admiration here in the comments. Thank you again to both of you for the beautiful readings and for sharing your time. I don't
Thank
know
you so much.
if
Thank
you'd like to
you.
say anything before we wrap up.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you. And it's just so wonderful to hear Sarah's translations, and I'm looking so much forward to the book. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm honored to be here, and thank you to our listeners and everyone who joined.
Yes.